Buying a house is undoubtedly expensive. And fortunately, over the last few years, it's gotten a bit easier. It used to be that you had to put 20% down plus closing costs, and that would be a massive barrier entry for a lot more people than it is even these days. What I want to talk about today specifically is called Seller Concessions, which is an excellent tool to reduce your closing costs quite a bit. The amount of real estate agents I run into that don't understand this concept, and the amount of loan officers that I run into that don't explain this part of the process astonishes me. So I've been wanting to make this video for a while. Whether you're a home buyer, whether you're a real estate agent that don't quite understand what's going on here, there's going to be some value in this video for you. The important disclaimer here is I'm a real estate agent. I am not a loan officer. If you're trying to buy a house, you should get pre-qualified for a mortgage and have that conversation with a loan officer. This is a general overview of how seller concessions work. The most simple way to define seller concessions is you are borrowing extra money towards the closing costs. If I offer to pay $200,000 for a house, the seller has their own costs, but they're going to receive $200,000 for the house. If I offer $200,000 plus $5,000 in seller concessions, I'm actually taking a loan out for $205,000, but the seller is still receiving $200,000. The extra $5,000 can go towards my closing costs. Meaning, if I want to buy a $100,000 house and my total cash to close in order to purchase that house is $10,000, and I want to use $3,000 of seller concessions, I'm borrowing an extra $3,000 that the seller is not receiving. I'm using that $3,000 to make my total cash to close $7,000, which is quite a bit easier to swap. I use the $3,000 example because in a conventional loan, concessions are capped at 3% of the total purchase price. In an FHA situation, they're capped at 6%. In most cases, you're not able to use concessions to cover all of your total cash to close. You cannot 100 or 100+% finance a house. You have to come with some cash out of pocket. So it's important to recognize that when you're writing an offer that involves seller concessions, the number that's most important to the seller is the number that they're actually receiving for the purchase of the house. Why they care about seller concessions and what amount you're using in seller concessions is because it has to appraise for the full amount, for the purchase price and the seller concession. So if you're making an offer that is at the very tippy top of what we think it's going to appraise for, if you add 3% or 6% of the total purchase price on top of that, the house may not appraise, and if the house does not appraise, that's going to put the seller in a bad position. If you happen to be somebody who's trying to buy a house and needs to use seller concessions, you're probably going to run into sellers that aren't willing to play ball with it in the same way that somebody who's making an offer without seller concessions for that reason. I'm going to oversimplify this, but if a seller were to take an offer with seller concessions, knowing it has to appraise for not only the purchase price, but for the seller concession amount, that means that they know that they're accepting an offer that they could end up netting more money by not having seller concessions. Because if it appraises for 106, they can get that 106. If they can find somebody that can pay the 106 without the seller concessions, they can receive more money. If the best offer on the table happens to have seller concessions, and they reasonably think it's going to appraise, that's still the best offer. So as the buyer, it can be kind of tricky to understand. Your loan officer and your real estate agent should be able to explain it to you. It's astonishing to me how many loan officers I see, and I have lots of loan officers that I love. They do a very good job, and they explain this thoroughly. Most recently, there's a pretty major bank here in Western New York, and I won't name them, but lots of people have checking accounts at this bank. I have a new buyer come to me with a pre-qualification letter from this bank that says you're qualified up to X amount to purchase a house. It did not say anything on there about requiring seller concession, which is crazy. This particular buyer does need all of the seller concessions that they can get, meaning they do not have the cash to close. They just don't have it. If we can find a deal on a house that will allow the full concession amount, they do have enough money to cover the cash to close plus the concessions to buy the house. If the pre-qualification says that outright, that's fine. You're still it's gonna be tricky in a competitive situation for you as the buyer. But in this particular instance, the idea that and so I call the loan officer up and they say, yes, it's our policy not to put that on the pre-qualification letter. That's crazy. That's crazy for a lot of reasons. The one that's most important to you is if nobody figured that out. So I looked at that circumstance, and luckily the buyer had a candid enough conversation with me that I knew how much cash he was working with. So when I put all those things together, even rough math, I realized that this person needs concessions, and it doesn't say that anywhere on the letter. And how that could play out poorly is we would run around town, we'd go look at a bunch of houses, we'd make a bunch of offers, we would finally get an accepted offer, we would then go to the bank to do the mortgage application. We would then realize for the first time in this process that this buyer does not have the cash to close. They just don't have it. So now we have to bake the concessions in. Now, the person doesn't qualify for the offer that they've made. We have to go try to renegotiate this offer with the seller, with the original offer not being a possibility. Is it possible that we come to terms with that seller? Sure. More than likely, they're going to they've received multiple offers, they're going to pick a different offer, or they're going to go back to market to try to get as much money as they can for it because of the market conditions. That would be heartbreaking for everybody involved, especially that buyer, who, to their knowledge, had done nothing wrong. The thought process to me makes sense. I bank with this bank, I need a mortgage. I'm going to go to this bank, have this conversation with this person that should know all of these things and should explain it to me very upfront, and just didn't do it. And we're not going to be able to figure that out until the very heartbreaking moment. And not to mention, you've already set yourself up in your head that you're going to buy this house. Now you can't buy this house, but now your situation's a bit worse. So now we're looking at worse houses. It can be very discouraging. I'm not here to ridicule loan officers. I will say, if you work for a bank, please work on the policy to get those seller concessions on that pre-qualification or pre-approval letter, and rant on that one. I always encourage people who are trying to buy a house not to focus as much on the purchase price as they are focused on total cash to close and monthly payment. If seller's concessions are needed, that is part of that conversation. If you happen to find a circumstance where you can buy a house with some flexibility and using seller concessions makes sense, that's great too. But this video is mostly pointed at buyers that need those seller concessions so that they can understand what they're up against and how the mechanics of these offers are going to work. So as we mentioned, buying a house is expensive. Fortunately, there's more options than ever to make it more affordable for people than it's ever been. Seller concessions is one small piece of a giant process, and you might not even need them. And I would love to help you with that. My name is Johnny Wagner. I'm a real estate agent in Buffalo, New York, and all of Western New York. I would, all day, every day, I spend time talking with people that are trying to buy a house and finding the right situation for them. If you would like to follow along with these things, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you're interested in buying a house, selling a house, anything real estate related in Western New York, my email address is down in the video description below. Thanks for watching.